stuff about a year ago where we were kind of developing our resiliency plans. We are back at that stage, kind of just bolstering what we've done in the past. And so we contracted with CPE, Ken Wilson and staff, to assist us with that. And you may know Ken from many, many meetings of Beach Nourishment, because he's also our beach nourishment engineer. So without further ado, I'm going to let him take over the lead and give a presentation to you guys. And then once he's done, if we have questions, we're going to be hanging around to answer them. Okay?
All right. Thanks a lot, Sandy. All right. Well, yeah, if some of you are trying to figure out and connect the dots with this RCCP program and some of the things that you talked about a couple of weeks ago and what we're here to talk about today, it's okay. It is a little bit complex and complicated, but I'm going to try to demystify some of this a little bit. We'll probably touch on some of the basics. I suspect that I've got the seasoned veterans in-house today, the ones that probably know the most about this program. But I know that we're recording this for everybody else online, and this is supposed to be a tool that folks can use while we're trying to get public feedback on these various projects. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the information that I have here. But just a little bit of a basic on that RCCP program. It started back in 2020 with the Division of Coastal Management. They were able to get some funding through the National Fish and Wildlife Federation, and they leveraged that with some funding from the legislature in the state of North Carolina, and they developed this program to try to help communities develop resiliency on their own. So it wasn't supposed to be this top-down program. They really wanted to kind of put out some seed money, let individual staffs at different towns and the public dive in and decide what resilience was for each community. This, we do beach nourishment all over the place, and it's different in every place, but resilience is really, really location specific. Every town has a little bit of a different spin on that. So the state recognized that, and that's what they've been trying to do. And so they're promoting this locally driven, inclusive, and forward-thinking approach to traditional hazard mitigation, and they're trying to incentivize innovative solutions. You hear a lot about natural and nature-based solutions. So they went as far as to develop this RCCP program handbook, which really guides consultants like us on interacting with towns like you all, and how the state wants this to progress. Again, really trying to allow the towns to do what they want, but these are kind of the guardrails and what guidance we need to keep focused on as we go through this exercise. All right, so this is a graphic that was developed by the Division of Coastal Management, and it shows the 4 different phases of what they envision this RCCP program. So phase 1 is community engagement and risk and vulnerability assessment. So assess the risks, assess the vulnerability. And then phase 2 is, with that information, develop a portfolio of projects that would get you on the path to enhancing your resilience. Think about resilience as, it's not something you necessarily achieve. It's sort of a sliding scale, and you're always trying to improve your resilience. Everyone has some level of resilience. We're just trying to make it stronger. We're trying to enhance it. So phase 2 are develop these projects and sort of prioritize those so that you've got these on-the-shelf projects, and now you're going after funding to try to implement that. So phase 3 is the engineering and design that would go along with those projects once they're developed. And then phase 4 is implementation, the actual construction, if you will, of certain projects. And so I've updated this slide a little bit to provide some specifics on where the town is in all of these 4 phases. So the notice of the 2020-2021 awards for phase 1 and 2 came out in March 2021. So that's when the town of Duck was informed that they were going to get some of the seed funding to go through phase 1 and phase 2. They started that work sometime in the fall of 2021. There was a lot of community engagement. Once they had worked their way through that phase 1, the risk and vulnerability assessment, and they started coming up with these project portfolios, there was community feedback in the spring of 2022 last year. And then the original phase 1, phase 2 study was completed back in June of 2022. Shortly after that, about a month after that, they were, the town was notified that they had received funding to move forward with Phase 3. So the Phase 3 project that was funded around July 2022, that's what's referred to as the neighborhood stormwater project, or the five neighborhood stormwater project. That's the meeting that I believe you guys had a week or two ago. So that has almost worked its way through Phase 3. It looks like finishing up Phase 3, right around this time, that neighborhood floodwater management plan. And then the grants, the first time the state has actually funded the Phase 4 operations is this coming year, and the grant application process is open right now. I understand that the town of Duck is submitting some grants to try to get funding for the implementation of what came out of Phase 3. All right, so that's kind of a rundown of how you all fit into that RCCP. So going back to the Phase 1 and Phase 2, part of that was, again, allowing the local communities define how this program would play out. They asked for a specific set of goals of what were your goals for resilience. And in the RCCP, the resilience strategy, we'll call it, for Duck, you all have established 5 goals: preserve the community's unique lifestyle, protect the critical natural resources and coastal ecosystems, build and promote a sustainable economy that supports residents and visitors, plan for orderly and sustainable growth and redevelopment, and maintain a well-run and efficient government that provide high-quality and cost-effective services. All right, so as we go through that, those are the 5 goals that we want to keep in mind. So again, Phase 1 and Phase 2, I described earlier. This is just kind of a brief reiteration so that it's in the record in this presentation as folks are going through. But Phase 1, Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Report, that was one of the work products that came out of that RCCP product, and then the project portfolio as well. All right, so part of that public engagement that happened last spring, there were some surveys put out to try to get public input on the evaluation of different hazards. And so there was a list of hazards. There was also an option to include, to add other hazards that weren't listed. There were 42 different respondents, and this is just a chart showing what percentage of the respondents were concerned about certain hazards. So you can see beach or soundside erosion, sea level rise, hurricanes and tropical storms. Those are kind of the top of the list there, as well as ocean and soundside flooding. And you can read through those other hazards. And then the other question that was asked was looking at the importance of certain assets. So they're listed up there on the left: the fire stations, police stations, emergency medical services, and then moving into infrastructure, roads, bridges, stormwater conveyance, and those are ranked up there on the right-hand side. So from 1 being the most important to 8 being the least important out of those specific assets identified. All right, and then one of the other work products that's pretty cool that came out of that RCCP Phase 1 and Phase 2 was this interactive critical infrastructure and hazard map. So all of those hazards, all of that critical infrastructure, they're stored in there as these GIS layers that you can turn on and off. All of that is available on the town's resilience site. All right, so if we've completed Phase 1 and Phase 2, why are we talking about these project portfolios? What's the purpose of this exercise that we were hired to do? Why are we sitting in this room on this wonderful, nice, sunny day today to talk about these projects? Well, I mentioned that Phase 2 was about coming up with this project portfolio. And the original project portfolio, it really only included about 5 projects. And the information that was in those 5 projects, they were very general concepts. And what the town realized is that the generality of those 5 projects in the portfolio, it caused some hurdles in terms of being able to implement those projects successfully, being able to get funding for those projects through grants and so forth. And so the town and the Division of Coastal Management partnered again to update the project portfolio. They brought our firm in to basically expand the number of initiatives that will meet the goals of the resilience strategy that we just talked about, and try to develop a greater level of information for each one of those projects. And so that handout that we've provided today, it's a list of 15 different projects that we've developed. So we've gone from 5 to 15. There's a lot more detail involved in each one of those. And what we want to do now is reprioritize those projects. And so the way that we're going to look at those, I've got those listed here, and for the next, 20 or 30 minutes or so, I'm going to walk through these projects and see if y'all have some questions about those. But we've broken those up into what we call non-structural projects and structural projects. And so think about the non-structural projects are sort of like planning documents or policies or educational programs that the town wants to implement, whereas the structural projects are more, I won't say brick or mortar, because a lot of them are, environmental, green infrastructure, if you will, type projects. But these are more along the line of construction projects. And so what we want to do in these surveys is we want to get folks to rank both the non-structural projects and the structural projects, because there are different pots of money that we can apply for grants for, depending on whether these are planning documents we're working on or whether these are, shovel-ready, if you will, projects. All right, so that's the task at hand, and like I said, I'm gonna walk through these. So once we get to the individual projects, some of these projects have a good map on them. I'll walk through those projects. Some of them are, we don't have a map, so to speak, just because of the nature of those projects. But at the bottom of each one of those, the same table that's in your handout there, you're going to see that we've provided information on the hazards that are addressed, the type of solution, an estimated cost for each one of these items, the estimated timeline to complete each item, and potential funding sources. So not only the town, but other partners that might fund these projects. And then, as I said, we've provided a map or at least a verbal description of the location of the projects. And then at the bottom of that table, we've come up with these prioritization measures. And so obviously a prioritization measure that we're going to use is how the public prioritizes these projects, but we're also looking at the level of cost benefits provided. So we've got these different descriptions of low, medium, and high. Because we are in the planning phase, we're not to the point where we've got actual cost benefit ratios or anything like that. We've just very generally described as low, medium, or high according to these criteria that I'm showing up on the screen. So we looked at cost benefit, social equity, which is part of the RCCP program requirements, and internal capacity, which gets to whether or not the town staff could handle all of this on their own, whether or not they would have to bring in consultants to help them out with this, whether or not even, with consultants, they might not have the capacity to be able to do this with the existing staff. So we've tried to give an indication of that. And then we've also added in co-benefits. So these are benefits beyond the idea of coastal resilience that these projects might provide to the town. So with that, I'm going to start walking through these projects. All right. The first project in that category of non-structural projects we call the Soundside Shoreline Management Study. This is a project that the town of Nags Head is sort of taking on themselves right now. So we're kind of tracking that process. But essentially, the idea is to look at the Soundside shoreline along the entire town and look at vulnerability in terms of erosion and flooding that occurs during different hazards on the backside. So instead of looking at like beach nourishment, some of the feasibility studies we've done in the past, this would sort of be the reverse, looking at the backside, focusing in on critical infrastructure areas, but also looking at ways of protecting some of those natural barriers that we have on the backside of the island, and looking at ways of preserving those. So this is something that this also fits directly into the CAMA land use plan. The CAMA land use plan specifically states that the town would evaluate the impacts of sea level rise and shoreline erosion on the sound front to improve the long-term resiliency of the community. And so this study would also look at the opportunity to protect critical natural resources and coastal ecosystems. And we also have in there that plan for orderly and sustainable growth and redevelopment. And ultimately, what we want to come out of this Soundside Shoreline Management Study is a list of tangible action items, tangible projects that can move forward. And actually, you'll see when I get to the structural projects, we've kind of put a placeholder in there for this particular project to where, as we're moving forward with the Soundside Shoreline Management Study, once that project is completed, we can quickly move that into the structural project list and plug it in that location. So, does anybody have any questions on the Soundside Shoreline Management Study? No, you've got those descriptions in front of you. All right. All right, the second, and again, this is in no particular order of importance. You know, we're looking for you all to provide some guidance on prioritization, but the second item is Dune Maintenance Education Program. So basically, the project map shows we're looking now at the ocean front along the entire town of Duck shoreline. We've blocked out the Corps Field Research Facility as they're in charge of managing their dunes in the FRF property. But the town has dedicated a lot of resources, not only through beach nourishment to actually build some dunes, but even throughout the rest of the project, or the rest of the town's ocean front where we haven't done beach nourishment. Lots of sand fencing, lots of vegetation to try to build and sustain these dunes. And so the idea here is to develop a specific dune maintenance education program, something that's off the shelf that can be provided to the general public, that staff can refer to, that really dials into how they want to maintain these dunes long term to tie into their overall beach management plan. Let me see here. The Dune Maintenance Education Program will be developed to preserve, protect, and enhance these valuable features. All right. Any questions about the Dune Maintenance Education Program? All right. All right, so this next one is Townwide Stormwater Management Study. Essentially, we've talked a little bit about the RCCP Phase 3, the 5 neighborhoods project. And so while the town staff was going through that project, there were a number of opportunities to get public comment on storm vulnerability. Those 5 neighborhoods, as I understand it, were picked based on repetitive losses that occurred over time in certain areas, as well as some of the permits that the town holds for stormwater discharge. And so there were some areas that they knew were historically problem areas. But through that process, the town asked for additional public input. And what they got was folks had identified hotspot or issues with stormwater, and that's what those green dots on that map in the upper right-hand corner represent. And so it's an indication that it's not just these 5 neighborhoods, but there are areas throughout the town that have issues. So the Townwide Stormwater Management Study, as it's written in the handout that you have in front of you, it would essentially expand the same scope of work that's already been done under RCCP Phase 3 for those 5 neighborhoods to the rest of the town. All right, so the current study includes geotechnical analysis, a GIS drainage shed analysis, public engagement, and the development of a menu of solutions, including cost estimates for each of those solutions. So this study would basically look at the rest of the town, come up with those same types of solutions that might work in the rest of those hotspot areas, and come up with cost estimates for those various projects. All right. Questions on the Townwide Stormwater Management Study? All right. Next project, again, we're still in the non-structural list of projects here. We've got a sea level rise analysis and climate adaptation plan. The town's land use plan established the goal of, quote, improving the community's resilience to rising seas and changing climates. So under those goals established in the town's CAMA land use plan, there are a number of different tools and management development items that were identified that have to do with sea level rise, and we've listed some of those in the description there. And so this sea level rise analysis and adaptation plan would really have 3 goals. One would be to research and adopt anticipated water levels based on the anticipated rates of sea level rise and how it might impact projects of various time horizons. Number two, it would implement higher standards of work and working with local utilities to improve the resilience of public infrastructure. And number three, provide guidance and recommendations on policies, plans, and ordinances that should be updated or redeveloped to address anticipated sea level rise. So obviously there are lots of different federal agencies, state agencies that are dealing with sea level rise. Sometimes those numbers are contradictory. Sometimes each of them have multiple different levels of anticipated sea level rise based on certain other conditions that might occur in the future. And so this idea is to research those and for the town to actually adopt some sort of planning numbers that they could use in the future of anticipated sea level rise. As we get further into this description, obviously we would want to engage in those with those federal and state entities, also partner with NGOs, folks like the Audubon, Currituck Sound Coalition, the Nature Conservancy, NGOs that are already doing work on sea level rise, partner with them and their research to establish these numbers. But ultimately, once these numbers are established, the more we learn about sea level rise and causes and things like that, the more our ability to project is sort of dialed in over time. So these wouldn't be static numbers that would stay the same forever. The idea here is that this project or these numbers would be reviewed on a regular interim, and then you're constantly updating those planning numbers as needed. Questions around the sea level rise analysis? Yes, sir.
Would sea level be taken into consideration for the first non-structural project, the Soundside Shoreline Management Study?
Yeah, I don't think it specifically states that, but I think once we get into some of the ocean front, the beach management, we have talked a little bit about making sure that sea level rise and obviously sand resources are also anticipated or considered in that. But that's a good point that we might want to specifically call out, that the Soundside Shoreline Management, there may be something in there specific about sea level rise, and I think the land use plan item that I quoted talks about evaluating the impacts of sea level rise and shoreline erosion, so it would certainly be something that needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I missed that.
No problem. Glad you brought that up.
If anybody has questions in the future, if you can just raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic so we can make sure that everything's recorded. Thank you.
All right. So the next project that we've got is called the Townwide Beach Management Program. So as most of you know, the dredging started up yesterday for the long-awaited, delayed 2022/2023 Beach Nourishment Project. But this item here that's still in our non-structural project area, it's something that's continuously going on right now. So the town back in 2013 conducted a feasibility analysis to look at erosion rates, to look at storm vulnerability along the entire town. And out of that feasibility came the Central Reach project, the project that goes just north of the FRF up about 1.6 miles. And so that area was determined that the vulnerability was enough to justify building a beach nourishment project. But since, I'd say, 2013, 2015, every year the town monitors the entire town and it reevaluates the volume change rates, the shoreline change rates throughout the town. Also looking every couple of years, we look at the vulnerability of properties outside the beach nourishment area to make sure that that kind of a uniform level of risk reduction is being provided along the entire town. So even if you're in an area where you haven't received beach nourishment, you're still in part of this townwide beach management program that at this point in time is basically looking at constantly updating the volume changes, looking at the vulnerability outside the project areas, and also including evaluation of sea level rise and sand resource availability into the future. And so this project would proposes to continue that And this again is one of those projects that directly aligns with the town's land use plan to evaluate the impacts of sea level rise and shoreline erosion on the ocean front to improve long-term resiliency of the community. Right. Questions about this townwide beach management program and how it's laid out? All right. Next project in the non-structural is the septic system and drain field planning. So this planning effort would include coordination with Dare County. The idea is to look at implementing community-wide septic system and drain field monitoring, remediation, and the continuity of operation planning. So trying to plan for making sure that these systems stay functional over the long term. Again, this aligns with the town's CAMA land use plan. The effort would focus on establishing an intergovernmental team, ideally representing Dare County, the town of Duck, and maybe other various municipalities within the region to look at groundwater sampling, to map groundwater deposits, evaluate and develop continuity of operation planning procedures, and to evaluate opportunities to assist private owners with maintaining their systems. This might include the evaluation of ways to provide government assistance for septic retrofits, potentially inspecting current septic systems, and assisting homeowners in maintaining their septic system. The team will also evaluate the feasibility of transitioning to an incentivized mandatory septic inspection program, routine groundwater and drain field monitoring and remediation. Anybody have questions about that particular project? All right. All right, I think we got two more. So this next one is establishment of a resilience review team. So this is kind of envisioned to be mostly internal staff. But basically, we're getting to the point where we've got a hazard mitigation plan, you've got a CAMA land use plan, you now have this RCCP resilience strategy, and we're talking about several other plans to be put out there. And so you've got a lot of plans. This idea would be, to have a formal resilience review team that on some given interval, they would review comprehensively these different plans, try to find and eliminate overlap, try to make sure that resilience planning is really streamlined here. The reviews would identify efficiencies, like to reduce that duplication. Let me see, the reviews would evaluate accomplishments, reestablish milestones, and potentially reprioritize various initiatives as time goes on. The review team would also incorporate ongoing and future plans, like some of the things that we talked about, the Soundside Shoreline Management Study, the Neighborhood Stormwater Management Study, that sea level rise analysis and climate adaptation plan. So it's really putting together this team to be able to comprehensively review these on a regular interval. Questions about that project? All right. And the last one in this list of non-structural is basically the idea of a post-hazard event assessment. So it's kind of formalizing a process. We do a lot of planning and preparing for for these coastal hazards, but in the events like tropical storms, hurricanes, torrential rainfall events, even things like king tides, those are testing our systems of how well we've planned and how well we're doing with adapting to this. So what this particular project looks at is standardizing the protocol that's used so that the same information is being collected and can be reviewed after these events, so that we can identify potential new hazards that are presenting themselves as we're being tested. And we're conducting these same post-hazard event assessments. The protocols would focus on collecting or obtaining data that helps determine what worked and what didn't work, any sorts of other vulnerabilities that were exposed. The protocols would identify specific data to obtain, like rainfall records, water levels, tides, wind records, wave heights, etc. The protocol would also establish information to be obtained at different site locations, maybe specific ground shots that you want to take, maybe specific drone shots that you want to take, looking at different, high-level marks on buildings, looking at certain areas of the dunes that may have scarped out, but sort of formalizing and making sure that those assessments are done time in and time out when these hazards present themselves. Any questions about that last project? All right, so we're going to move on to the structural projects, okay? As I mentioned, I think we've got 7 of these structural projects. The first project is the Central Reach Beach Nourishment Program. So as you can see in the map, this is the actual area that's under construction right now. And the idea here is, the beach plan that I talked about earlier that includes the entire town and the central beach, the goals here are really to provide a reasonable level of storm damage reduction, to mitigate long-term erosion, and to maintain a healthy beach that supports valuable shorebird and sea turtle habitats. So as you all know, in 2017, the initial project was constructed along about 1.6 miles. This project the project includes the continued monitoring and maintenance of the beach nourishment project. So it's seen as not these individual episodic events when the dredge shows up. It's seen as a long-term project where sand needs to be monitored. The performance of the project needs to be monitored, and sand is placed over some given interval. So the monitoring includes annual beach profile surveys used to evaluate the performance of the project and determine when maintenance is required. Maintenance of the project involves the replacement of the advanced fill and material lost from the design template on an as-needed basis. All right. Questions about the Central Reach Beach Nourishment Project? All right, the second one that we've got on our list of structural projects, we've titled Acquire Oceanfront Property to Support Future Beach Maintenance. So when these beach nourishment projects are constructed, obviously we've all seen in the last couple days all the equipment that's involved in that, but that equipment needs some way to get out onto the beach. And in the 2017 project and in this project, there wasn't a specific designated area within the town. In 2017, we relied on the Corps of Engineers to allow us to go through the field research facility. In 2022, 2023, we've had to bring that equipment up from the south end. And whether we went through the field research facility or we brought it up from Southern Shores, there are additional costs and mobilization that go along with that project that are borne by the folks, the county and the town that are paying for these projects. And so recently the town went took the step to actually acquire an oceanfront property to support future projects, but that property is specifically in the area, that Central Reach area. And so this is basically in there to keep an eye on potential additional properties that might come on the market, opportunities that might present themselves, so that in the future, if beach nourishment is needed further to the north or further to the south, south of the FRF property, that there is the ability to provide that access for those projects. One of the things, I haven't touched on all of the different numbers that we've got down below, but we've also used co-benefits here as the Ocean Rescue would also have access to these locations. So, hello. All right, the next project is the Town Park Shoreline Protection Project. All right, so some of you may be familiar. This is a project that folks have been working on for a good bit of time at this point. So what this project, the way that we've described it, and this comes for some of the documentation that's already been developed, is that the project is intended to enhance the resilience of the town of Duck, Town Park and Town Hall property by protecting a significant stretch of coastal marshlands along the Currituck Sound. These marshes serve as a natural buffer to the town's property. The proposed sills that are part of this project would reduce wave energy, which reduces erosion and would allow the native marsh grasses to reestablish there in those protected areas. Let's see, the project would entail the construction of 17 nearshore vertical wooden sills to dissipate the wave energy that has damaged and eroded the coastal wetlands at the site. Behind 4 of those sills, some fill would be brought in, and that fill would be placed about 215 cubic yards and vegetated. And then there was also a specific area that about 500 tons of stone would be placed and used to construct 120 linear feet of stone revetment to stabilize one particular part of that shoreline. And this is just showing the extent of that area. I think on the town's website you can find some figures that even hone in on this a little bit better and show the specific location of those sills. Any questions about the Town Park Shoreline Protection Project? All right. All right, so these next 2 projects sort of go hand in hand. Y'all are certainly aware that Duck Road is the primary transportation corridor in and out of the town of Duck. Also serves points north of you. So it's a very vital transportation corridor. And the town has already taken steps on this particular project that we're calling the NC-12 Coastal Resilience Project. I believe they've received funding through the BRIC grant program through FEMA. That they've already taken steps to address the most critically vulnerable section of Duck Road. That's this area that's shown on the map between Old Duck Road and Barrier Island Station. So the project is scheduled to start in the summer, or this summer. It includes basically 3 elements: the construction of a subsurface stormwater chamber system to address inland flooding, elevation of NC-12 to address storm surge and flooding, and then item number 3 is the reestablishment of the shoreline embankment and constructing a living shoreline using native vegetation and breakwater sills to minimize effects from storm surge and wave action, trying to erode away that shoreline there in front of this stretch. It's recommended that the town, so in addition to obviously the construction, this project also recommends that the town monitor and maintain the project in a way that sustains the protection provided and that continuously gains information to help design and implement future projects aimed at addressing flooding and stormwater management along Duck Road. As we're aware that there are other areas along Duck Road throughout the town that this project may end up being a model for. Any questions about this specific project that is just in that area? Yes?
What kind of monitoring would you recommend the town do?
That may be more of a question for the specific engineer that's working on this project. But obviously, looking at the functionality of those, that living shoreline, the reestablishment of the vegetation, the functionality of the system that they're putting in there to store some of that water. I know a couple of these projects have been built in the past where it takes a while before you get an event to where you can actually test it and see how well it's functioning. But continuing to look at those types of things, I think. But Sandy and I were just talking before that. I mean, a big part of so many of these projects is that some of the technology that is being used, it is fairly innovative. And so in the same way that beach nourishment was thought of as, as innovative in the past, each one of these projects is very different. So when you're putting these projects in these dynamic environments, it is very important to not only build it and assume it's kind of a one-time fix, but to monitor how well it's functioning, and then if you need to, make small adaptations. And as the project becomes more dependable and more functional, you're building support for the public for them to go into other areas and spend public money on different projects. So. All right, kind of as a follow-up to that last project, now we're looking at flooding and stormwater management along other parts of Duck Road. And so we've broken this out because there's been so much work done on the project that we just talked about. There are other areas, other hotspot areas. We basically call out these 3 specific areas, which are, from the northern town boundary to Station Bay Drive. That's the one shown on the right-hand side of that map. And then the two that are kind of bunched up together is a segment from Cook Road to Marlin Road and another segment from Marlin Road to Schooner Ridge. And these areas basically come out of the study that was done in 2020 from the program for the study of developed shorelines out of Western Carolina University. They completed what was called the duck infrastructure vulnerability, and they identified a number of areas along Duck Road as either high or high moderate vulnerability. Obviously, the highest vulnerability was the project that we just talked about, but we wanted to include these other three areas because they have been called out in a number of different studies. Let me see here, I'm checking my notes, make sure I've touched on everything. Obviously, the risk vulnerability assessment that was included in the town's resilience strategy did identify roads and bridges and stormwater conveyance like ditches as the highest overall vulnerability of the assets. And so the town, this idea would be the town would develop additional solutions to flooding and stormwater management along that Duck Road, these three Duck Road corridors, to ensure safe public access as stated in the land use plan. All right. Any questions about this particular project? It's kind of a 3-in-1. All right. I mentioned earlier that this sixth project in the structural is basically a placeholder for that Soundside erosion mitigation study that we talked about under the non-structural. So this would be a place to plug in any projects that come out of that, whether they're one-off projects or whether there's a series of projects. This kind of gives you a placeholder to start implementing those projects. This is probably, I think this is the only project where we put to be determined in the cost, simply because the first phase of this study has yet to be done. So again, this is kind of a placeholder where we would place any of those specific strategies that come out of the Soundside erosion mitigation study. All right, and the last one, it's a bit of a hybrid. As I was kind of going through this, we originally had lumped it into the structural, but it really is kind of a hybrid because there's a certain amount of it is study and investigating what the issues are for stormwater outfalls and ponds, and then the second phase of it would be sort of implementing some of these retrofits. So the way that we've described this is that it would include coordination with owners and operators of stormwater outfalls. I was interested to find out that most of the outfalls along the town of Duck are actually owned by NCDOT. They're not owned by the town or the county. So we'd want to be coordinating with the owners of that infrastructure and ponds, stormwater ponds as well, to number one, evaluate existing stormwater outfalls and connections to the town stormwater system. Number two, evaluate existing stormwater ponds for functionality. And number three, provide recommendations for improvements / retrofits of either stormwater outfalls and or stormwater ponds. This might include the purchase and installation of backflow preventer devices for priority stormwater outfalls in Duck, and on the removal of sediment from various ponds, stormwater ponds. The initial assessment would focus on whether such actions at specific locations would be effective at preventing flooding. An assessment of any cracks or damages to outfalls would also be conducted, and estimates for those repairs of such issues would be provided. And then, kind of the phase two of this hybrid approach would be the project would also include the development of routine maintenance plan for stormwater outfall, stormwater ponds, et cetera. So any questions about this last project? Yes, ma'am.
On the stormwater ponds, okay. Thank you. On the stormwater ponds, I would, as you said, DOT owns the outfalls, but the ponds are maybe owned by private homeowners associations or private people. Is that something that you would try to work with individuals as well, or is it just DOT that you envision having to work with? I'm just thinking of issues in the past where we've had ponding or stormwater issues on the path on the multi-purpose trail, and have tried to work with subdivisions on their common area and have had issues. So I'm just curious.
Sure. So, did you want to take that, Sandy?
The ponds, in most cases, are certainly privately owned. And yes, if this project were to go forward, we would certainly be looking for some cooperation and collaboration in order to make it effective.
I think you'd follow a similar model to some of the stormwater projects that you're looking at as well that have a lot of cooperation with local communities. All right. So a lot of information. We've tried to give for the folks that wanted to tune in and watch the video, a little bit of a Cliff Notes version of it. But you guys have these handouts in front of you. I'm sure they'll be available at Town Hall. I think we're going to put a PDF up on the website as well that folks can read through that information. But ultimately, like I said, to finish this process out and to finish this prioritization of this updated list of project portfolios, we want folks to go ahead and take that survey. When you click on either the link or scan the QR code, basically there's a little introduction, but what you'll see is a list across the top, I believe, of all of those different projects that we just walked through. We're going to ask you to rank the non-structural and rank the structural. And do they have to rank do they have to put a ranking in for every single one? Okay, so it would be like 1 through 8. You have to pick through those, and I don't think it'll allow you to go through to the perfect. It won't allow you to go through to the next one until you've ranked each one of those. So please provide that feedback. For those of you that are here, please help us get the word out and share that information. It'll be really helpful to finalize this and prioritize those projects. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions, but Joe is here as well, Sandy's here as well. They're as big, if not bigger, part of putting this thing together as I am.
And I guess I would just like to clarify that the survey is only going to be available for about 10 days, correct? So that we can try and pull all the information that's submitted together in time for the May council meeting. So I would say don't delay, jump online, and put in your 2 cents. It's very important for us. Joe, do you have anything you want to add?
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
If anybody has any questions they want to chat with Ken or Joe or I offline, we're going to hang out for a little while longer before we have to prepare for our planning board meeting.